Okay, thanks for tuning in to Jets Chronicles as we recap the NFL draft for the New York Jets. And what we're going to be doing here is getting you ready for the 2026 NFL season. I'll be your host, Greg DePalma, throughout. I am the senior analyst for Ourlads.com. And of course, you can check out Ourlads.com, the NFL depth charts in the industry, as well as, of course, you can check out the Ourlads Draft Guide, which is still available. If you want to check out all the scouting reports, I believe there's only one scouting report not in the guide, and that would be for the offensive guard from Miami. All the other scouting reports are here at the Ourlads.com website, where you could order the guide or the PDF version if you don't want to wait for the guide in the mail. Anyway, we're going to be here all off season, getting you ready for the 2026 season, which looks like it's going to be a lot better just by so far how the offseason has appeared for the New York Jets through free agency and the draft. And let me welcome in Jan Levine, who is a former season ticket holder for the Jets, a Jet fan just like me for life. And that's could be fortunate or unfortunate. I think at this stage, though, Jan, I'm starting to get the feel that, as we're getting older, we really need a situation where we can count or at least hope that, is it possible we have one regime that can give us some lasting glory for as long as possible until we get too old, where we can't really thoroughly enjoy it too much? And I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get pretty excited about this regime. I know you're in New York, so there's a lot of negativity on the Jets and Aaron Glenn specifically. I'm not one of those people. And after this offseason and draft over this weekend, I just feel even more comfortable that I think they got the right people in charge.
Yep. Well, it's good to be back. Good to talk some Jets football again. We won't talk about hockey because we know how well it's gone for both of our respective teams.
Yeah.
But in terms of football, yeah, I mean, you probably have to go back to the Parcells era or maybe even part of Tannenbaum with Rex Ryan here to have a regime that seemed to know what they were doing, right? And both of them clearly had their hits and misses. And what you hear a lot about, especially up here, as you mentioned, is the negativity towards Aaron Glenn. Part of that, I think, started press conferences early on did not help, right? The PR team of the Jets did not do a particularly good job of helping Glenn settle into that role, although I think he got a little better as the season went on. But what you do hear more frequently is the respect for Darren Muji. We saw last year with the trades that he made during the season, right? Adding pieces and picks, but especially some pieces that will end up being part of the lineup. We talked, Donnie Mitchell and a couple of other guys that they added. The offseason trading Jackson to get Vontez Sweat to give them some interior defensive line help, free agency, and then now obviously the draft. And, Muji clearly appears to know what he's doing. He has a plan. He's sticking to that plan. He's aggressive to trade up when he thinks he needs to trade up, which we saw in the draft. And then also where the player that they likely wanted, especially in the second round, went right before them. He pivoted, traded down, got another fine draft pick with another pick that they used to package to move up again later on. So Muji definitely has a sense in terms of what he wants, what he's looking for, willing to adapt as necessary. And I think that's kind of evident if you look at the roster and the depth chart you're showing, just how many new guys they brought in and how many of them are in key positions compared to where they maybe were a year ago. So this is a younger team with a couple of veterans around, and we'll have to see where we land. But it's hard not to be excited about Muji. It's hard not to be excited with him bringing in Frank Reich as an offensive coordinator. As you mentioned, since I'm in New York and have FAN, and Boomer Esiason is basically like best buds with Frank Reich because they roomed together at Maryland and been friends for years. So you'll likely get hopefully some insights as things go on. And Reich didn't have to take the job, but he likes challenges. And we've seen in the past that he's been able to install a system that maximizes the talent of the players that are there.
Yeah, we're going to get into the offseason in general a little bit later on, but we can segue the Frank Reich addition, of course, as the former head coach at Stanford, along with the Jets' first selection, who actually played at Stanford for several seasons. There was a lot of hope for Bailey as a player at Stanford, but the team just was not going well. I mean, it really just fell apart real fast over the last several seasons. So Wright comes in, and then Bailey leaves, and he gets a big payday. And that just shows you how much Texas Tech thought of him. He didn't have the stats, but highly thought of in the portal. Goes to Texas Tech. We all know what happened at that Texas Tech defense. Matter of fact, if you watch the Oregon-Texas Tech game in the playoffs, if it wasn't for the putrid offense for Texas Tech, I mean, that Texas Tech defense was national championship worthy. They were really strong all season, and Bailey was a major part of that. And so the big question was it going to be Bailey or Reese? And I actually want to start off with, because this is important, because I want to get the reaction of SNY here. This is actually I'm highly critical of about 90% of the coverage by the Jets, especially whether it's in the news, as far as the writers, podcasters alike. But if I had to pick my favorites, the ones that I trust the most, it would be these two. I think Zach does a fairly fair job with The Athletic, covering the Jets. And I think this tandem here is pretty good as far as I'm concerned. You get this on SNY. So let's just listen to this point here, because this is something that I think is important.
We wrote a rumors and rumbling story on SNY about the NFL draft. Dude, everybody I talked to in the first round was like in the first 7 selections of the NFL draft was like, it's Reese, it's Reese, it's Reese, it's Reese, it's Reese. And I was like, all right, man, like we're now talking about like several general managers, handful of coaches, like a lot of people like, dude, it's going to be Reese, going to be Reese, going to be Reese. All of a sudden you started having the rumblings come out about, no, it's still Bailey, it's still Bailey, so Bailey. Peter Schrager was heavy on that. You had Todd McShay heavy on that when he flipped back again. So I started checking in with my guys. And my guys were now saying, like, I still think it's Reese, but now I'm thinking a little bit more, I don't know. And I was like, all right, now we're wishy-washy, but what's the reasoning? And the reason, like, well, they need the win now player, whatever. It's wishy-washy. Dude, this went all the way to the point where we are an hour before the NFL draft. And I'm sending text messages out. And I had one coach who told me, he goes, dude, I am sitting in my war room right now with my general manager. I think it's Reese, and he thinks it's Bailey. And then at the same time, another general manager texts me, goes, hey, I'm really confident. I still think it's Reese. So like the Jets kept this thing so under wraps, dude, in a way that like I don't think I've ever totally experienced before covering the NFL draft, which is saying something.
And so a couple of things there. The last part I think is really important, and that is how this front office has completely changed things when it comes to keeping things under wraps. There were too many whistleblowers. There were too many rumors coming out of the Jets under the Robert Saleh regime. They were too nice to the media. And I actually think that's what you got from Aaron Glenn. I think you got almost, you know how it is when you hire head coaches. It's always you want the exact opposite of what was recently there. Well, Robert Saleh couldn't be more nice to the media. And here comes Aaron Glenn. He's a Bill Parcells protege. And what did you expect? Of course, he was going to be, antagonistic with the media. Did it get out of hand? Probably so. But then again, it wasn't a great season. And that's what happens when you're a rookie head coach. But bottom line is, the thing that I really like is how much they have kept things under wraps. They don't allow things to get out of the building. And that's very important when you're rebuilding a winning culture. Is you got to make sure that the people in the front office, the players, the coaches, they're all buying in. And when nothing gets out, that means they're all buying in.
No, I mean, look, as you mentioned, we talked about in the past overall that there were leaks, there were issues. Look, I don't think we'll ever get a full true sense as to why it was Bailey. I do think that the win now mentality had a component of it. I think also they viewed it as the known versus the unknown, right? I think Reese right now that they project to be maybe Micah Parsons. And if he ends up being Parsons, then we'll see what the pick is. And then ironically, and as you mentioned, being in New York, there was an article either in yesterday or today's paper that Bailey and Reese will be compared for years because Reese is playing in the same stadium as Bailey is right now, just for the team that wears blue as opposed to green. So those comparisons will go on forever, right? So Bailey gives them a outside linebacker that can rush the passer as they maybe change their system a little bit. He gives them a guy that we know that may need to get a little bit better against the run, which he's admitted, and that's something they're going to have to work on. But you see the speed, you see the ability to shift gears, the ability to get around the corner or cut inside. So, and the amount of sacks he had last year and tackles for losses, we know what the potential upside is. The hope, obviously, is that he pairs with the other guys that are on the team right now to give them a rush, which they didn't have. And we'll get into it later, but I think part of the reason for their 4th round pick was to bolster the internal defensive line, which I think you and I talked about a lot the last couple of years with all the defections and all the guys that they lost, John Franklin Myers and others. They were a sieve in the middle of the defense, right? And now the hope is obviously with the trade of Jackson for Sweat and the addition of the linemen and the addition of what they did in free agency, that middle of the line clearly becomes a bit more stout from where it was, and hopefully enables the outside guys to use their speed and their ability to get after the passer, cognizant that the middle of the line will clog things up and be able to shut down the running game a little bit.
Yeah, you speak of the running game, and this is the thing that is really impressive about what they've done this offseason. So I'm going to just take a look at the Pro Football Focus numbers for the Jets run defense with their personnel right now. And of course, a lot of these guys are new. So you've got, and at the bottom would be Enagbare. He's got a 64.5 number. But the 64.5 number for Enagbare is his best number. That's his best attribute, is his run defense. Okay, you throw in the fact that Malachi Moore, what's his best attribute? Run defense. Joseph Asai, what's his best attribute? Run defense. Dane Belton, run defense. Let's see, we can go to Brandon Stevens, even though we know he's a corner. He's really good stopping the run, which is important for a corner. That's what the Jets want. They want corners who could also be physical and they could be good in run defense. He's got a good run defense grade. Cisco, best attribute, run defense. Harrison Phillips, run defense. Jarvis Brandley, nickel back, just like Stevens. Best attribute, he can tackle. He can help in the run game as well. Stiggers has been that way so far in his career. His biggest number, he's got a 79 as a run defender, as a corner. Sweat, overall, his best is obviously going to be a run defender. He's almost at 80. Even Minkah Fitzpatrick, of course, is huge in the box and stopping the run. He's almost at 80. Jamian Sherwood, who did not have a great season last season, his run defense grade is 81.0. And then you throw in Demario Davis, who's nearly at 89. Those are all the players now that are on the New York Jets that will be playing this season. And most of them, and I'm not talking about the rookies, of course, but I just named just about every starter except Nashawn Wright, who's here because of his ability to impact in takeaways. All these guys, their top attribute is against the run,
which was a crying need the last couple of years, as we talked a lot about, right? The middle of defense got gashed with all of the defections or the trades, etc. And there clearly, as you mentioned, was a focus both in free agency and obviously in the trade market, given who they brought in to improve that area, right? And this is what we talked about, where Bailey, no question, struggles against the run. But if you have guys around him who can compensate for that, enabling him to maximize what he does well, then his inability to play the run, at least initially, is mitigated to an extent by the other defenders that are on the field.
Okay, let's continue. We know David Bailey, what he's here for, that is to be a pass rusher. I'm going to try to give you some little bit of snippets out of the Ourlads Draft guide for every player as we move on from player to player. So let's see. For David Bailey, really, there's not much more than you probably haven't already heard. And by the way, there is a note in here about how he was an improved run defender, answering some questions about him as a complete player. And so when you're There's no question about it. The coaching is going to coach him up at the NFL level to be a more complete player. Okay, so let's move on. Pick number 2 for the New York Jets actually came on offense when they selected Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end out of Oregon. And I was a little bit surprised to hear. I know Boomer was shocked, and I heard some other analysts that were surprised. And I don't know why everybody was so surprised. I mean, this is something that I talked a lot about. A lot of the people that I talked to talked about it, that if the right receiver was not there for the Jets, even though we thought he was in Mekhi Lemon, that Sadiq would be the next best option. And the fact that even though they had Mason Taylor, don't worry about that. I mean, Mason Taylor, don't worry about that, because of the fact that if you look at Frank Reich's history, he really likes to employ 12 and 13 personnel packages. So he's going to want a lot of 2 tight end packages out there. And so the more you can get 2 quality tight ends out there as possible, that's really going to help you out. Even though Sadiq early on in his career might be looked at more as a slot guy, and that's fine, because we need as many receivers and game breakers on offense as possible. So yeah, I was not surprised by this pick, and it's possible the Jets, if this kid works out, could end up as the best tight end prospect that the franchise has ever had, because we got to go way, way back to Mickey Schuler probably. If I had to rate the tight end the Jets have ever had, I'd probably have to put Mickey Schuler up there at the top.
I might go with Jerome Barkham or maybe Castor a little bit, but yeah, I can see that Schuler would definitely be up there. So for me, I think
that's Sadiq a long time ago. If you want to go to your guys,
very long time ago. Because Kyle Brady really worked out. He was a good pass blocker, but that's about it. And the same with Anthony Beck. So
what was that? Was that the Warren Sapp draft?
Yeah. Let's not talk
Kyle
about
Brady
that,
and we were all hoping for Sapp.
Let's not talk about that.
Okay.
I think with Sadiq, as you mentioned, right, the Jets got a little creative with Carnell Tate off the board and Jordan Tyson off the board. They looked at the guys who were still out there in terms of wide receivers, right? And that includes, as you mentioned, Malachi Lemon and a handful of others, and decided that there wasn't a big spread between them. But what I think you need to do also with Sadiq, given his skills, stretch the field, good speed, enables them to use a 2 tight end system technically, put him in the slot a little bit. But I think you have to combine his pick with actually the Omar Cooper pick, right? Because they moved up from 33 to 30, giving up a 5th round pick to get Cooper, who was a guy that you and I talked about that I was relatively okay with. They took him at 16, right? But to get him at 30, given what he brings to the table as a slot receiver, right? And now you pair Cooper and Sadiq with Wilson and Mitchell and let's say Hall. You now have five receivers if they go that kind of setup that gives Geno Smith additional options, which they didn't have before. And Cooper hopefully should be and Taylor, right? So it'll be Taylor, Sadiq, Cooper, Wilson, and let's say Adonai Mitchell or Breece Hall. You're looking at a significant uplift in terms of the weapons that was not there previously. And Sadiq has ridiculous speed for a tight end. So if he's matched up against a linebacker, he should be able to beat him. And if not, that gives maybe Wilson or Omar Cooper or maybe Mitchell or even Hall coming out of the backfield, a mismatch that they can potentially exploit. And as you mentioned, Frank Reich loves running those 5 wide sets or 4 wide in a running back set with a good offensive line and decent quarterback. Gives them much more opportunities to produce than they had last year. And I think most people in the first round probably love the Cooper pick more than anything, given what they did. I know Boomer was talking about that they thought that he was surprised they gave up so much. And I was listening going, they gave up 33, which they were going to have to do anyway. And they gave up I think 169 or 120.
Yeah,
I'm
5th round.
Yeah, you do that every day of the week. If you're concerned that your guy's going to go, you give up a 5th rounder to move up 3 spots and grab the guy you want as a back end 1st rounder. I think that was a no-brainer type of move that they made. But this is what I talked about. Muji reading the market and being aggressive to move up when his guy was there and being willing to part with a pick to be able to get the guy he wanted, especially late in the 1st round.
Something that Omar Khan failed to do for the Pittsburgh Steelers, when all he needed to do is make sure that he had conversation regarding that possibility of another team jumping him. And he could have given away a couple of those same draft picks that the Eagles gave away for Mekhi Lemon.
Yep.
And then he didn't even wind up. Now they got a tackle, but it's a good point too, because a lot of people thought that Omar Cooper would have been a good spot for Pittsburgh, because there was more mocks that had all three top receivers gone by then, and the Steelers wanted a receiver, which they did. And that's why Cooper was there. So you did have to wonder, well, why didn't they, with those extra draft picks, come back in and get Cooper? Well, I guess they preferred to hold on to those draft picks at that point and ended up with Bernard. So maybe they don't see a big difference, the Steelers, with Bernard Cooper. That's going to be something that will play out. But yeah, I think this is why you have to wait for the data, the round to be complete. You got to wait for the draft to be complete before you start over criticizing how a draft is going. Because just like you said, I think there were a lot of Jet fans out there that were hoping for Mekhi Lemon, and maybe were a little bit surprised that they went tight end. And so maybe they were a little bit upset. And it could have been the same fans that were upset that they didn't get Reese instead of Bailey. So now they're getting a little bit anxious here. But then they come back in and do something that really, if you take a look at some of the other trades that were made, a lot of these trades that were made in the first several rounds, I mean, you were seeing teams having to give up multiple draft picks to move up just a few spots. So for the Jets to only give up a 5th round draft pick to move from the 2nd round into the 1st round, I mean, you couldn't have done better than that.
Yeah, no, sorry. It was one pick, 179 to move. So 33 and 179 to go to 30. I think almost anybody would say it's a no-brainer, given what Cooper does. And like I said, when you combine Cooper and Sadiq, if you had taken Cooper at 16, we all know Sadiq would not have lasted to the 30th pick, given the upside potential that he has and what he brings to the table. So to me, the two of them, while they are separate and distinct, are a conjoined entity when you start figuring out the grade you'd want to give the Jets for the overall draft.
Okay, so as far as these two picks, we'll take some snippets here. Kenyon Sadiq, blazing speed and jumps through the ceiling with an incredible catch radius. Excellent route runner, capable of running a wide receiver tree. Quick in and out of breaks. Mismatch, as you mentioned, for linebackers and a lot of safeties. Can stretch the defense and take the top off with his speed. And again, that's going to be the thing also that is going to be huge for any team that has the rare tight ends that can do that. And not every team has a tight end capable of stretching the defense. And that is a big, big advantage for your offense. And as long as he ends up being the talented player that we hope he is, it's going to be huge. He's a big target, doesn't shy away from contact, survived big hits coming down with the ball. He's also a willing run blocker. Needs to continue to physically develop to become a two-way tight end at the next level. He's more of a big slot receiver at this point, but with physical development, you'll see him play more attached tight end. He can catch and run block, and with his speed, he should be an impact player. So that's Sadiq. And then for Cooper, who was considered wide receiver number 5, 6, by Ourlads. He finished top 3 in the Power 4 in both missed tackles and forced and touchdown catches in his breakout season. So again, that's one thing that Cooper really, even though he was a huge part of Indiana's championship team, he did not have like a big 2, 3, 4 year career. It was just a 1-year breakout year. So you do have to keep that in mind. His physical play style and never say quit mentality raises the ceiling of what his tools would normally produce. While he is not the biggest or fastest, he can wear multiple receiver hats and find different ways to contribute. He exploded onto the scene in his 4th year. However, the lack of top end speed and size create a small margin for error. Takes hits like a rock. Strength at the catch point is a difference maker and will play bigger than his size suggests. So, and again, it sounds like the typical type of slot receiver you're looking for. Somebody that, even though he doesn't have great top end speed, and you're going to have to really be cognizant of the fact that he's not a complete athletic specimen. The one thing that he's really good at, you zero in on. That's what good coaches do. and he fits perfectly into the slot. And now the Jets really, if you think about it, both Sadiq and Cooper are both considered early on in their careers. This is going to be where they're going to be playing in the slot. And that'll make things a lot easier also for Garrett Wilson, who does not want to play in the slot. Garrett Wilson is a much better weapon for the Jets if we can put him outside and create the opportunity to have your best receiver be a little bit more of a downfield weapon as well.
Absolutely. And it takes the pressure off defensive backs, etc., double teaming him if he's able to be wide in those guys, because especially if they're productive in the slot, defenses are going to have to focus more on the inside as opposed to the outside, which gives, as we've seen Wilson, give him a crack and he'll be able to make the catch as long as the ball's even close to him. So that should help him hopefully also as well. Plus there's other weapons that take the pressure off of him, which last year was not the case.
And of course, the Jets, look, say what you want about the pick or what anybody thinks on the outside, but inside the building, the Jets are still high on Arian Smith. It was never going to be a breakout in his rookie season. And if he can develop and he can help stretch the defense as well with the speed that he has, you put him out there with everything else they got going on that you talked about before, without even mentioning Arian Smith, that would be just huge. His development this year is something that is going to be, because we can count pretty much on everybody else basically, even though we're still kind of not sure about Adonai Mitchell. But Arian Smith, that's if that kid and we're not asking Arian Smith to be Jameson Williams, okay? We're just asking him to be somebody that can catch 3 to 5 touchdowns a year and maybe have his yards per average catch be at like 20. If we can have that, I think we'll be ecstatic. And then, of course, Isaiah Williams will make the team because of his return ability, and he's not a bad number 5 receiver as well.
Yep. And as you said, right, Smith, you put Smith and Sadiq out there with both of their ability to stretch the defense, that affords opportunities underneath and gives the slot receivers also an opportunity to go one-on-one or beat somebody, or gives Wilson the ability to have one-on-one matchups as opposed to double and triple teaming as we did last year.
Okay. So then in round number 2, the Jets made my day by drafting my number 1 sleeper in the entire draft, D'Angelo Pons from Indiana. It's one of those things where you're constantly hearing your favorite team and they spit out players left and right every year. And it's very rare that they spit out the name of the player that you feel is one of the top underrated players in the draft that can have a major impact. And when I heard it, I just was so excited and so happy that they added this kid to the team, because we knew they needed to add another corner, especially in the nickel. Because Minkah Fitzpatrick, yes, he can play in the slot, but that's not his desired position. You want Minkah to be able to play all around, disguise coverages, things like that. But Jarvis Brownlee was really supposed to be more of the starter in the slot. And you couldn't really count on Jarvis to be that guy. Now, he's a nice player, and maybe he could develop into a really good player and a really good starter. But he's not the player that we thought we could get in this draft. I think he was a 4th-round pick, Brownlee. That's the kind of prospect he was. So we were looking at maybe 2nd round, that kind of area where the Jets would add someone. So when they named Pons in round 2, I thought it was fantastic. They got themselves a hell of a player, and I know he doesn't have the size, but that does not matter. This kid is an A-plus corner, and especially in the nickel, where his size won't be that much of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another example where Muji read the market and moved back, right? So I think pretty much it's a given that they wanted Jacob Rodriguez, who I would have loved as a linebacker. He's one of those guys that's all over the place, right? And he ended up going to Miami at 43, and a bunch of the analysts speculated that that's who the Jets' target was. And when he went, Muji said, okay, I'm not going to get the guy I want. Let me move back to 50. I'll get an extra 4th-round pick to do so. And then, as you mentioned, they took D'Angelo Pons, who's been referred to as Aaron Glenn 2.0, basically based upon his size, based upon the kind of way that he plays. People say that they remind him of Glenn, a bit undersized, but guy who's a playmaker, somebody who can force turnovers, has the speed to close. You mentioned they needed another corner after addressing the safety position. So Pons was a guy who would have gone clearly a lot higher if he had been 5'10", 5'11", but because he's only
first round,
5'8",
absolutely.
182, he dropped in the draft, and Muji read the market, was able to go from 44 to 50, pick the guy who was your sleeper coming in, and then get the extra pick, which they ended up kind of using later in the draft.
Okay, some excerpts here, and again, this is what you really got to love about a player like Pons. He was he was 2 playoff games on their way to the championship game. He was a defensive MVP in both the Rose and Peach Bowls. And even though he's only 5'9", 173, he has got the definition of a twitched up athlete. He plays bigger than his size, remarkable footwork, consistently gets to the catch point, forcing incompletions and breaking up passes. No fear taking on blocks. He can mix it up with bigger receivers. And this is important. He's also contributed on special teams, on punt and kick block teams, including a block punt for a touchdown. Despite size limitations, he has starting potential in the NFL. And for sure, D'Angelo Pons is going to be a part of that special teams unit, who was one of the best already last year. And we're still, though, just one, I guess, undrafted kicker away from and having a successful season from maybe having another special teams impact in 2026. But he's definitely going to be a part of that.
Yeah, one more thing on Pons I thought was interesting also with Muji, I read yesterday, is that when Muji and Glenn and those guys did their interviews during the gathering of information for the draft, one of the questions they asked some of the receivers and the other players that they interviewed was, who was the best cornerback that you guys went up against in your games? And almost unanimously, the answer was Pons. So I thought it was interesting, that they thought to ask that question to gather the intel on other guys within the draft, and then clearly utilize that intel in order to be able to draft him when they did. So another good job by Muji in terms of utilizing information and then adapting to the loss of maybe the guy they wanted originally, but finding a guy who's most certainly a fit and augments what they've already done on defense.
Let's stick on defense while we're here. Let's talk about the other 2 draft picks. Darrell Jackson, defensive tackle, definitely looks like he's going to be somebody that will get, hopefully within the next year or 2, be a big part of the contribution with the players up front. Of course, Sweat was the big trade deal that we talked about before, but Darrell Jackson is not as big as Sweat, but there's a lot to like about what he brings to the table. And now it's up to the coaches to get the best out of him, because there's a lot of inconsistency in his game. There's a lot of, I don't know whether or not there's, desire and all that kind of stuff. They're only going to draft players who love the game. So I don't think it's that. Therefore, I think it's the coaches that feel, this is what happens in the draft. The coaching staff has got to feel that they can get the best out of some of these players. And because they're not going to get the best coaching in college. And so it's up to these pro coaches to feel that way. And they apparently feel they can get the best out of Darrell Jackson. So let's start with him. Again, I think he's about 315 or a little less than 315 pounds. So again, he's not a big guy.
6'5", 315 is a pretty big boy.
But he's not Sweat.
As you mentioned, Connor Hughes, who obviously from SNY does a great job, wrote Chloe maturity issues. Did not have a great performance the East West Shrine game. He didn't have a good pro day, but has all the makings to be potentially a good defensive tackle or most likely a nose tackle. And what he benefits from, actually, also the addition of Andre Sweat, right? Sweat can hopefully help mold this kid, hopefully share some of the information and the intel and some of the skills that he's learned over the years, and hopefully transmit that down to Jackson, who hopefully will be a sponge and pick up the those bits and pieces of info from Sweat. But everybody projects that he could be a pretty good defensive lineman, and as you said, right, he's a rotation guy, which gives him a bit more depth. And Sweat is clearly the starter, but maybe Jackson could be the guy who eventually maybe replaces Sweat in the middle of that defense.
Yeah, because now they have a handful of good young players backing up the starters. And of course, Onyemata was a big free agent addition. He's a run first guy. That's what Sweat's going to be, even though Sweat's got the ability to do a little bit more than that, but that's his primary job. And then you got the other veteran, Harrison Phillips, who is really important. I mean, he's a leader, but he's a leader there, and he does his job in the run game. Of course, we were all excited about what we saw last year in the development of Jawan Briggs, getting him in a trade, another nice trade by Muji, bringing him in. He showed some really good pass rush on the interior, so I think he's going to be a big part of the bench. And then, you hope that Page can take another step, Watts, and then you don't know about Mozzie Smith either. A former first-round draft pick, different team, different scheme. So this will be a first opportunity, to go into with this coaching staff, the new coaches, training camp, all that. So we're going to see if they can get anything out of Mozzie Smith as well. Darrell Jackson, 3-year starter, imposing size and length to go with power and strength, ideal for an interior defender, often aligned on the center in a zero tech, incredible power. For the most part, holds the point against double teams, incredible length, rarely misses a tackle, lacks consistency, seemed to take a step back in 2025, has potential to be the big interior defender teams covet, but will need to develop to be more than a space eater. And then in round number 7, with the last pick, the Jets got value with VJ Payne, who Ourlads graded as high as a 5th-round draft pick, and a player that, even though he is listed because he played safety in college, you do wonder whether or not, because a lot of, you talked about Rodriguez and the need for the Jets to add to the linebacker room. You do wonder whether or not Payne is also going to play a little bit around the box at the linebacker position as well, even though, of course, just playing around the box in general is what he does best as a safety. So, to get him in the 7th round, I think that, and you could imagine, especially with his physicality, he's going to be a really good special teams player.
Yeah, I mean, Hughes noted that when he reached out, some guys had a 4th round graded him, so probably late 4th, early 5th. To get him in the 7th round is good value, gives them more depth, gives them a special teams guys. You mentioned guy maybe you move up into the box, but anytime you can grab somebody that late who had much higher value and potentially can fill a role on your defense, it's a guy that you're not going to complain about. And Payne wasn't necessarily a need per se, but he also provides some additional depth and support, and probably will get time on special teams. And with 4.4 speed, not too bad. I mean, he had an interception last year. One of the things is I think the Jets did try to identify also as guys who are ball hawks a little bit, guys who potentially can hopefully create turnovers after the kind of season we had last year where there were no interceptions for the entire season. So that should be a focus of what they added. And Payne brings a bit of speed, willing to, get his nose dirty just a little bit and, provide some additional depth at the safety position.
Yeah, he had 4 forced fumbles the last 2 seasons. So to go along the lines of what you're talking about there. And look, this is why I countered. And if you could check out some of the videos here on the Jets Chronicles site, you see the first videos I did. And a lot of them had to do with just taking a look back at a lot of the criticism from the Jets, especially at the end of the season. And it was the worst month of December in the history of the NFL, and the coaching was terrible. And of course, nobody wants to look at exactly what kind of personnel was out there in December. Not only was Brady Cook out there, who will not be on the Jets this season, because we're going to get to the next pick and the offensive players here that round out the draft of why. But also there were a lot of defensive players in there, especially in that secondary, that will not be on this team because they were not NFL players. And that includes the Clark brothers, Dean and Jordan. They're done. Okay. Because all you got to do is take a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You don't need more than 10 or 11 defensive backs. Okay. They're done because they never should have been out there. They were out there because of injuries and lack of personnel. And that was just the start of it, let alone what was also out there on the front 7 and on offense, including a quarterback without Garrett Wilson and so forth. So you try putting any coach out there with the personnel that Aaron Glenn had to deal with in December. But of course, they don't want to do that. They just want clicks, and they just want to, even Jet channels, they just want to bash their own team just because they just want to, draw up whatever they want to draw up. It's just sickening to me. And those people aren't real fans. Okay. Oh, as far as Payne, 6'3", 206. So this guy's got good size and runs a 4.40. A 4-year starter. So he played in 52 games. Big-bodied safety, intelligent pass defender, communicates well with teammates, impressive movement skills for his size, good ball skills, tackles best in the box where he can utilize his strength and toughness. His hard hits help him knock out the ball. Mentioned those fumbles that he forced. Unpolished footwork. Lacks top-end speed that you'd want to see for the position. Misses far too many tackles, either lunging, not wrapping up, or tackling too high. Skill set may be better utilized as a big nickel or even a linebacker. Okay, now let's wrap up with the final 2 picks on offense, starting with quarterback Cade Klubnik. And I don't understand why anybody would be against this pick. This is exactly where Cade Klubnik was going to go. He was going to go in the 4th round. Did you see Garrett Nussmeier get picked up by any other team until round 7? I mean, the Rutgers quarterback got drafted before Garrett Nussmeier. So stop that. Okay. Just stop that. So as far as Cade Klubnik is concerned, you have any team, I said this countless, not just for the Jets, but any team that doesn't have their franchise quarterback yet, and that especially is looking at the 2027 draft, should take a quarterback, a flyer and a quarterback in this draft class to see that maybe, possibly, if one hope that, hey, do we have our guy? Is it possible? Is this guy a lot better than people thought he was? And this guy could be our guy? At the very worst, you've got yourself a young, capable, long-term quality backup. And that's exactly what I think Cade's going to be. I think Cade is going to be around here for a long time. There's going to be injuries to quarterbacks, and especially whoever we draft in 2027, and to have a young quarterback that's been in a lot of big games in his career and won a lot of big games and has the athleticism that he has, I think he's the perfect number 2.
So when Mendoza went number 1 overall, which we expected, right? And then Ty Simpson ended up going to the Rams, which came as a surprise. And Carson Beck, who was rumored potentially as a player of interest to the Jets, went 65th overall, which I think surprised people. And then Alar from Penn State, went to Pittsburgh at 76. Then there was obviously a material drop-off in terms of talent. And for
There's
me,
only 2 guys left, Klubnik and
2 guys left, right?
Nussmeier.
So, well, I actually liked Cole Payton a lot, who the Eagles got later. I think what part of the consternation and part of the criticism of the pick is what they gave up based upon where Klubnik was rated, right? A lot of people had him in the 200s. Not a great athlete. Tailed off last year. He does check a lot of the boxes. If you look some of the tweets about the Parcells formula in terms of how long he's been a starter and TD and interception rate, etc. Klubnik projects to be potentially a backup, which, as you said, if they're getting their number 1 quarterback in the 2027 draft, that's fine. Is a guy that they project to, even as a backup, while he may lack the athleticism and the quick twitch ability, he has the ability to read defenses, is a guy you can potentially plug and play if you need to when the starter's out and have him fill in without having a material drop-off in terms of overall performance. But I think the giving up the 2 4ths and the 6 to move up to get him in a 6 back is really where the criticism comes from. And like I said, I would have liked Peyton, who went 179 to the Eagles. Nussmeier was interesting that he kept falling and falling and falling. And then we find out later he's got a cyst on his back that's going to require surgery. He's got maturity and attitude issues. Look, he went to the perfect spot to Kansas City at 239 because he'll sit forever potentially. And once Mahomes comes back from his injury, and maybe he ends up like the former backup, I think it was Chase Daniels, another who made a fortune in their career, being a backup to him. But look, I don't have an issue with Klubnik. Do I think he's an elite guy who's a potential starter? No. If he can end up being a backup in a 27 draft net stat starter, that's fine. I just think the issue is did the Jets necessarily have to move up with the 2 4th-rounders to get him without maybe him falling further, though maybe obviously they thought he had what they wanted, and maybe they had some intel that a couple of other teams were sniffing around and had some interest in him and decided to pull the trigger. But this is where we talked about also those extra picks they got, right? Moving from 44 down to 50 and getting the extra pick, or some of the extra draft picks they got from some of the other trades, and also the compensation picks afforded them the opportunity to move up and get the guy without materially impacting their draft overall.
Yeah, look, I didn't mind the trades of those picks at all because the Jets have, what was this, a 9-man class?
Yep, I think so.
Yeah, 9-man class, whatever. I mean, how many picks you want? The Jets are not the Miami Dolphins, okay? The Miami Dolphins are definitely in a much more bigger rebuild than the Jets are. Dolphins need every single pick they can get, and then they'll make the team. All 11 or 13 players that the Dolphins signed were drafted. The Jets had a little bit more talent than that and did not need 10 or 11 draft picks. So the fact that they have 8 or 9 picks, whoever it is, that's it. I mean, how many picks do you want? And throw in the fact that if you don't trade up to get Klubnik, and let's say he's taken, well, if you're not taking Nussmeier and you don't believe in Peyton, say, that's it. You're screwed. You're not going to add a quarterback to this draft class, and that's why I think they did it. Keep in mind, and this is a player that in his very first career start was the ACC championship MVP. And in 2024, he had one of the best dual threat seasons in program history with 40 total touchdowns. He's a big play threat with both his arms and legs. Excellent deep ball production. He'll get jumpy in the pocket when pressure bears down on him. Stares down the initial target too soon, erratic footwork. Struggled to find consistency in his final season, showing poor mechanics and decision-making. A hard-nosed competitor rising to the occasion. He could find a home as a developmental backup with starter potential. And this is also important, and I said this the last several weeks. Any of these players from Clemson and Penn State should be looked at differently because Penn State and Clemson were considered two of the best teams before the season started last year. That those two teams would have been predicted for the championship game and nobody would have laughed. And they had disastrous seasons. Matter of fact, James Franklin gone. That's how bad the season was for Penn State. And in Clemson, it was just remarkably bad. And of course, Antonio Williams, the big playmaker for Clemson, was banged up. That hurt Klubnik as well. So there was a lot going on with the coaching staffs of Penn State and Clemson when you talk about two teams that were supposed to have bigger aspirations and things did not work out. So when I look at Klubnik, I'm grading him on 2024. I'm not grading him on everything that fell apart in 2025. So I think because of that was a player, by the way, that based on his 2024 could have been considered a first-round draft pick, and nobody would have laughed. But instead of going up in his development, he went down in his development, and I blame that on coaching. So I look at this as a 4th-round draft pick, and that's why I say I think it's a great added value. He's going to be around the organization for a long time. Brady Cook is done, and so now it's just a matter of, do they believe Klubnik can be a backup in 2026? Do they believe that a Zappy, Klubnik, Geno room is good enough? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Of course, it wouldn't be surprising if they added another veteran, but I guess it all depends on what they view Bailey Zappi. Do they feel confident enough that Bailey Zappi could step in for a game or two if Klubnik's not ready?
Yeah, and as we talked about, right, they ended up making 3 picks in this year's first round, right, by trading up 3 picks to get there. We know they have 3 picks next year in what, as of right now, is expected to be a quarterback-rich draft. Yep. Which is why I wouldn't say the word punting, because other than Mendoza, who clearly had a meteoric rise this past year to become number 1, and Ty Simpson, and we know how much Sean McVay really loved that pick, given his reaction with Matthew Stafford still there. We talked about, right, there was a material drop-off to the point where you could argue that Beck and Alar going 65 and 76 may have gone earlier than expected also. And then, as we see, there was a material drop off. So bolstering the team around the quarterback, and then hopefully potentially adding that quarterback while having a serviceable veteran, which is what I consider Smith right now, in the hope that he rebounds from a awful season last year with the Raiders, gives them the opportunity to see what else they need in addition to that quarterback, and also makes them a bit more of an attractive landing spot compared to maybe coming into this past free agency and offseason.
Yeah, I mean, so here's a question. All right, so this is something that I think Jet fans are going to ask themselves soon enough, especially the negative ones. Okay. What happens if Geno Smith has the type of season that he had 2 years ago with Seattle, 3 years ago with Seattle? He's not 40 years old. He's not Aaron Rodgers. He still has the ability to have a big year if everything falls his way. What if he has a big year? What do you do next year with those picks? Do you say, I think Geno could be here for the next 2 or 3 years. Let's continue to build around him. Let's try to, and let's say they miraculously make the playoffs this year with Geno. They're a wild card team. They go one and done. You know, they win 9 games and they get to 9 games, playoffs or not. And 8 games, 9 games. And they feel, wow, look at that. We got to sign them. We can't just go to rookies again. We got to sign them. Do you then definitely go still take the plan of using that first round draft pick on a quarterback? And more than likely, yes, I would say that's still the way to go. I'd probably at that point maybe take a quarterback that doesn't need to be rushed, somebody that could sit a season, and then maybe I'd be okay, because if Geno then doesn't repeat it, then I can get rid of him based on the contract and then elevate my draft pick. But this is the other reason why I like the Klubnik move, because what if Geno does have that type of season and Cade shows you enough that he could possibly be the guy to take over for Geno? Maybe you don't have to use your number 1 draft pick in 2027 for a quarterback.
Well, as we know, right, they have Indy's pick, they have Dallas's pick, and they have their own pick. If you'd have to rank them in order of where they will finish during the season, Indy, Dallas, Jets, how would you rank the 3?
Well, right now I would have to rank them Dallas, Indy, Jets.
Okay.
But if the Jets have the type of season I'm talking about, and we don't know about the Colts, what if Daniel Jones can't stay healthy again? But I still think the Cowboys are 1 no matter what. I think it's Cowboys and either Jets or Colts. But if Geno has the season that he has, then all 3 teams won't be in the top 10, but that's okay because you have 3 first-round draft picks.
Right.
You can trade them all to move up to 5. Say if the Jets are at 12, say the highest pick out of the 3 is 12, trade them all, move up to 5, 6, and with 7 quarterbacks coming out, you'll get one of them.
Right. So again, part of it I think depends on where each team finishes, right? If Indy finishes as they did the end of last year, and granted no Jones, no Gardner, several other guys who were injured, right? If they finish that way, there's a possibility that pick is a top 10 pick. We don't know that. I would expect it, right? If Geno has the kind of year he had 2 years ago, then yeah, you could see the Jets picking middle of the first round. If he has a year between what he did in 25 and 24, Jets may go, let's say 6 and 11, 7 and 10. Pick could still be a top 10 pick, right? So it gives them options, as you said, and with a quarterback-rich draft. And look, a year ago, nobody thought Fernando Mendoza would be a 4th-round pick.
We thought this was going to be a really good draft for quarterbacks this year.
Right. So
because a lot of people thought Arch Manning was going to come out. They thought that Dante Moore was going to come out, and everybody pushed it down to next year.
So the Klubnik pick buys them time. The Smith signing buys them time. And then it all depends, in my opinion, what you want to see this year is growth, right? I think playoffs is a long shot, but if the team, let's say, goes 7 and 10,
That's
8-9.
That's what I would hope. If it's anything
Right?
less than 7 wins, I'm gonna be disappointed.
And you see growth, and you see you can clearly identify what remains as an area of need based upon the additions that have been made the last year and a half. And if the QB is one you need to get a franchise QB, 6-11, 7-10, you should be in the mix for one of those top 7 guys, presuming they stay the same way.
Okay, so let's get back to my question then about what do you think with the Bailey Zappi as the veteran backup? Do you think that they'll trust that with Klubnik and Zappi, or do you see them going out and getting another player? I think they've mentioned, the former Cowboy backup who was with the Ravens last year?
Cooper Rush?
Yes. It mentioned Cooper Rush.
I mean, we saw what Rush did with Dallas, when Prescott was hurt. And
he's fine. He's better than Zappi.
I mean, I could see Zappi filling the role, though, right? I don't think there's an inordinate talent there, but I do think they may get to the point where they trust him enough to be that second or third quarterback.
Okay, we'll see how that works out. Let's now move on to the final player, Inez Cooper. That was the only player not afforded a scouting report at Ourlads. He was in the book, as are probably about 100 or so players that were not given scouting reports. But he's a 6th-round draft pick. And look, he played for the Miami Hurricanes. He played, and again, another player that I know we didn't talk about it, but this was a big deal for them to make sure that they drafted players that came from winning programs. And Inez Cooper did, almost won a national championship. There's a lot to like about him as far as a pass rushing offensive guard. I heard the report that we just showed you. Actually, we showed you a different report, but the SNY report did a good job talking about Inez Cooper and his pass rushing grade at PFF, which was almost remarkably good. Like no sacks given up, things of that nature. But running game, that's a lot different, which again is a little unusual for a guard. But I'm glad that they picked up a guard. I'm glad they picked up a player that they could develop, because I'm not like overly sold that some of the players that they have that are backing up that he's competing with right now are worthy of throwing into the starting rotation if necessary for a game or two. The Xavier Newmans of the world. Those guys, those are limited players. So hopefully Cooper can, within no time, be one of the top interior players that they have on the roster. I don't look at him as a long-term starter, but hey, why not? Just like we talked about with some of these other players, you got to add depth, and I think he does just that.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think Connie Hughes wrote, as you said, SNY, no sacks allowed according to PFF for the last 2 years. I think 817 snaps, right? So that gives you a sense how good he is in the past. And as you mentioned, just how good he is in the past is how much he struggles in the rush, which is why he was available in the 6th round. So as a depth offensive lineman, a guy you hopefully can teach technique to help him be, if not above average, at least average in the run game. But if he ends up being that kind of a player and he maintains his ability in the passing game, there's a guy you can plug and play as a depth offensive lineman if somebody goes down or something else, without a material drop off in terms of performance, though he's most certainly a long way away from being a guy you expect to contribute this year.
Yeah, the one thing when I look over this team, and we can kind of wrap up with this as we kind of look at how the offseason went, I look all around, and there are only, I'd say, two positions on the team, only 2 now, that I'm a little bit concerned with depth, which is great because you can't fill it all when you're rebuilding in one offseason. Well, this is their second offseason. So that I think next offseason, they have 2 more position groups that they have to add depth to. More depth on the offensive line, and also at linebacker, at inside linebacker. Those are the 2 areas that I'm a little bit concerned with if there are injuries. Because I think when people were talking about, well, I'm surprised the Jets didn't draft a guard, say, earlier in the draft. Well, who knows what would have happened if Ioana would have been there. and he would, if Baltimore hadn't taken him. Would the Jets have taken him? Would they have taken him over Sadiq? I think that's a distinct possibility. Who knows? We don't know. But once you move out of Ioana, I don't think the Jets needed any other guards. I think it was either you take a standout, plug and play, upgrade guard that's going to make your offensive line really good, or you just add some more depth later on. Because right now, in other words, you need to find a guy that's going to replace Josh Myers. And Ioana would have been that guy, but no other guard in this draft was going to replace Josh Myers. And if you're not going to do that, then why are you going to spend an early pick on one?
Yeah, and I do think in terms of your linebacker comment, as we said, right, I think Jacob Rodriguez was the target who clearly would have been the future starting inside linebacker, maybe right off the get-go.
I know. Now he's on Miami.
Right. He was on. I've heard the comparison somebody said was a little bit faster Zach Thomas is what somebody said. Right. So it's a pretty heady comparison for a guy, but he would have been a perfect fit. But Miami ended up taking him one pick before them, which is why they pivoted and got Pounds, who was a major upside guy. And then
they're fine. Yeah.
Can you scroll down to special teams for a second?
Oh, we're at kicker?
Yeah. So I actually like the guy they bringing in as an undrafted free agent out of BYU. No, they got a guy at a BYU they're bringing in.
He's not there yet. Okay.
Yeah. But obviously I told you I really wanted the guy out of Michigan who
I signed him today.
The Giants signed as a undrafted free agent yesterday also. No, they signed him yesterday. He doesn't have a big leg. I think his max at a BYU is like 55, 56.
Will Ferrin.
Accurate kicker. I think he's clearly going to get a chance to make this team based upon the need. Like I told you, I really wanted the kid the Giants ended up signing, which was the guy out of Michigan, who to me would have been the number one target. I really thought they may even use a 7th rounder on him, given the crying need for place kicker. Punter we're fine at, given what we have, but he could end up being the Giants kicker. I don't know if he's listed yet.
No, but here's the thing.
He's not there yet.
But here's the thing, though, is that just because he's with the Giants does not mean that he's going to stay with the Giants.
Yep.
See, they have Jason Sanders.
Yep.
So this is more of a flyer, and let's see if we strike gold. And if we do, then maybe we move on from Sanders, sort of like what the Jets did. You know, they brought in a young kicker who ended up with the Rams, unfortunately. That's the only thing that sucked about sticking with Folk last year in a meaningless season, is that we might have had our long-term kicker and we let him go to the Rams, and that's a championship Super Bowl team. And they've got a young kicker who we had on our team. So if he doesn't make it, if he doesn't beat out Sanders, then the Jets can pluck him up on the practice squad if they want.
Yeah, and you and I talked last year actually when they got the thicker kicker, right? We both liked him a lot. I mean, we actually both wanted him to make the team, and given what we saw he did with the Rams, holding on to him would have been the wise move. Now, I don't think either one of us expected Folk to go elsewhere either and get a 2-year deal. Personally,
that was a lot of money.
We talked late. Yeah, but they could have afforded it. And it's a guy who's been was a long-time Jet before he left and came back and was productive and good, and a guy who maybe they should have kept. I mean, we talked about this with Jason Myers also, right? When they kind of let him walk out the door. So if there's one quote unquote air quote mistake I think that Muji made was not trying to lock up Folk maybe during the year.
I mean, you have to trust though that there's a reason for it. I mean, because you're right, they could have afforded it, but there had to be a reason that we don't know about.
Yeah, so a couple of guys.
I don't know why anybody doesn't ask these guys these questions. Nobody's asked him anything about why didn't you re-sign New York? Why didn't you?
He's going to probably talk about his age. He'll probably mention Folk's age, but look, we've seen guys kick.
Sure.
Like I said, and in terms of some of the,
not like they had a young kid waiting,
right?
Then we'd understand that. Like if Mevis was waiting in the wings, and we could have just we got Mevis though, we're okay. Folk can go.
We did. Unfortunately, he got signed off the practice squad by the Rams, and became their kicker. I mean, a couple of guys I've seen the Jets sign. They signed another kid out of BYU, a cornerback by the name of Maury Bamba, 6'3", 190. He ran a 4.19 40 at his pro day. 8 pass defenses over his last 2 years at BYU. As I mentioned, also they signed the undrafted free agent. They added They added
Maury Bamba.
another kid out of BYU. So hopefully he ends up being their kicker, which would be great because
Will Ferrin and Maury Bamba.
Right. And then there's other guys. So Harrison Glazer did a pretty good job of listing a lot of the guys that they've signed. I think he has like 9 or 10 guys are bringing in as undrafted free agents. So we'll see.
Harrison Glaze.
Glazer. It's NY Jets TF Media.
Oh, is this it though? Harrison Glazer?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. Jets.
Oh, SER. Okay. This is it here? There it is.
Yep. So if you go down kind of his list of, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the list of the guys. Keep going a little more, keep going a little more. There you go. Now he starts getting all the undrafted free agents they signed.
All right. Yeah, this is nothing. Nathan Voorhees. I don't know who that is. Is that his son? Let's see. DT Sheffield. Okay. Yeah, he won't make the team. He could be another kick returner though. Maybe, I don't know. Nathan Voorhees, Ball State edge rusher, first team All MAC. That's somebody to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan Voorhees. Okay, there's the Bamba kid you're talking about.
Yep.
Okay.
The 8 pass defenses is nice.
Okay, good size as you mentioned and speed.
Yep.
Interesting why he would have not been drafted. That's a good combo. Now let's see. Xavier Hill, offensive line. This is the former Ohio State running back. He was a former linebacker. Big guy. Look at that. 5'11", 235. Maybe you could turn him back into a linebacker. They might do that. Let's see. Anyone else? Yes, here's the kicker. Ferrin was perfect on extra points over his last 2 seasons in 82.5. I guess he kicked the 56-yard field goal, so that's good. Looks like a little guy though.
Yeah, not a big life.
Definitely not Mevis.
No.
The anti-Mevis. They got a long snapper in there from BYU as well. Colin Lacey, okay. I know he had a pretty decent career. Louisville, didn't he? Was he in Louisville? Yep, Louisville. Yep. Transfer, I guess, from South Alabama.
So I think that's the population of who they signed as undrafted free agents.
All right. But yeah, that's the kicker is the most important one.
Yep. And as you said, right, Sanders is there. I don't see him not getting it, but
true.
You know, if the kid out of Michigan has a good camp and they think he's the guy, Jets could try to sign him off of the practice squad. So
yes, yeah, and by the way, Ferrin, even though he does not have a scouting report for in the Ourlads Draft Guide, he was considered their 4th rated place kicker. So the top 3 did have scouting reports. Ferrin did not. He was their 4th. So. All right. So yeah, again, this is what it's about. When you're rebuilding a roster, it takes several seasons, usually at least 3. And the Jets have been through second off season. And so next year will be the year, the definitive year that, again, as you mentioned before, we just need progress. You know, even if it's a 7-win season, which is fine, they need to be in a lot of games where they could have won 10. Now, maybe their schedule will give them a little bit of a break. You know, maybe they'll be lucky enough to get the Patriots 2025 schedule. That would help because it's another thing is that the Patriots are in a whole different world all of a sudden with the Mike Vrabel stuff. They're also going to get a first-place schedule, and we'll find out if they get the type of injury luck. So you have to have a whole boatload of things go your way. Injury luck, schedule luck, all that. Patriots had all of that in spades last year. So we'll see if the Jets can get some of that rubbed off on them. And also, you know what? I really believe this is the first time, I must admit, that in all the years that I've been as an analyst covering or trying to analyze what the Dolphins are doing, this is the first time that I actually think they got it right. I think they've hired the right GM. I think they hired the right head coach. And I think within the next 2 or 3 years, I think both the Jets and the Dolphins are going to be back where they belong, near the top of the division.
Well, I think the key for the Jets is a couple of things, as you said. 7 wins would be baseline, 6 or 7, right? Improvement shown across the board, right? And that's twofold. One, clearly, I think that'll help the fan base start to get energized, which right now they're not. B, it takes some of the pressure that was on Glenn last year, and I think it may alleviate it slightly where his job security isn't mentioned as much because there'll be growth shown across the board. Makes Muji's life a bit easier also. And then, as you said, right, presuming we get the growth that we want to see, we also don't have the declines in areas and that we saw last year for some players. One of that also is including locking up Breece Hall long-term, hopefully, which is supposedly something that's still on the table. That means you go into the 2027 draft with your needs identified, with 3 first-round picks and a handful of second-round picks, and the ability to, as opposed to putting fingers and toes in multiple dikes to close it, you're now hopefully targeting again after a strong free agency class to then hopefully take that next step forward, which then I think would be a 10-win team in 27, presuming we get the progression this year as well.
Yeah, because the tricky thing is, and look, say what you want about, I don't want Geno Smith to have such a great year because then all of a sudden we won't draft a quarterback. Look, they're still likely to do that. But what you don't want to do is be in a situation where Geno struggles, you draft a quarterback anyway, and then you throw the quarterback in there, and then we're still 2 or 3 years away from being the type of team we want to be. So what you would prefer is Geno to succeed. You still draft your quarterback or hope that Klubnik's the guy. Either way, do both. And then just keep winning. And then when Geno gets to a point where he can't do it no more, you throw in the young quarterback and you've got a whole load of players around him, quality starting, winning players for them to develop with. And that's the thing that I like about the way that the Jets are doing it now, is that unlike in previous years with Darnold and Zach, they by the time they draft this quarterback that they want to take over, the team will be better prepared. They'll be a more talented team. They'll hopefully even be a playoff contender. And that's exactly how you want to throw these rookie quarterbacks in. Like we've seen in Green Bay, that's how they've done it. That's how Patrick Mahomes did it with the Chiefs. That's the best way to do it. It's the best way to throw these young quarterbacks in, to do it when there's a winning organization.
Yeah, and part of that also depends on culture and attitude, which I think they're hopefully building there, right? It's been clearly a issue in the past that now hopefully has been remediated a bit, as you said, right? No leaks really coming out, as Connor Hughes said. I mean, even the day of, there was a lack of clarity, and also not having him in for his 30-team visit, Bailey, threw some smoke screen up, which nobody knew what it meant. I don't think Bailey even knew that he was going to be selected by them until they kind of actually made the phone calls. So, and fun part was obviously Sadiq thought he was getting pranked, which doesn't necessarily help our viewpoint among the fan base. But given what happened with Shedeur Sanders last year, right, you can understand it. And then when you realized that he was getting picked, you can see the change in attitude and mentality. So, we've talked about this, right? They, in my opinion, they had probably about a A-, B+ draft, something in that range, probably more A-.
That's what ESPN gave them, A-.
Some of the things I would have liked to seen them do, we talked about also, where I personally said I love Pons. You would have given me Rodriguez, I would have been ecstatic just because of the need, as you talked about, right? Getting that linebacker for the future. That's an area they're going to have to look for next year. Demario Davis hopefully fills that role this year and proves to be the veteran leader that CJ Mosley was, but unfortunately Mosley couldn't stay on the field enough. And hopefully Davis takes some of the pressure off of Sherwood because he'll be calling the defensive signals.
Absolutely. Yeah, good point. Because Sherwood hopefully will be a much better player without having those responsibilities. But again, we don't have a whole lot of depth there unless they they did draft the kid from Miami last year, Malwinoa, but we don't know. So we have to see. That's all part of development. And again, you can't fix it all in one off season. And the good thing about it, at least with Pons, is Pons will be a lot more available this year than I could imagine Rodriguez would have been. Rodriguez would have more been an understudy, or who knows? Maybe they would have traded Sherwood. That's possible. If they would have drafted Rodriguez. But either way, you can't lose with Pons. So Jet fans are going to love him, and he's going to be a big part of that secondary. Okay, so Jan, I look forward to doing this again with you for sure once we get closer to training camp. Matter of fact, maybe a training camp preview would be the next stop. The schedule comes out. Maybe that's even a good one because that's in a few weeks. We'll maybe be able to chat again when we know exactly what the schedule looks like from game 1 to game 17. So maybe we'll do this in about 3 weeks.
Sounds good.
All right. So for Jan Levine and Greg DePalma, thanks for tuning in to Jets Chronicles. And again, you can check out the Ourlads Football Network, where I host most of my programming. There'll be links in the description of this video for that. There'll be links in the description of this video to order the Ourlads Draft Guide, either the hard copy or the PDF form. And you could also check out Proline TV, where I also have programming there for sports like golf, NASCAR, and horse racing. Big week next week for the Kentucky Derby. So you'll see links in the description of this video for all of that. Let us know your comments. And that, of course, could help us as well, besides the obvious with subscribing, liking, sharing, all that stuff, just like our little green guy does here. I got a nice little green helmet on this guy. I like that one. So that'll wrap it up here. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you.